Every journey begins with a single step. For many, the first step is the greatest challenge. Yet for all, the obstacles, the doubt, and conviction teach us about ourselves. It's these moments in life, a test of our abilities, our mind, when we don't know, but we still proceed, driven by the unspoken, but ignited by the obsession that yields some of life's greatest lessons and rewards. Join me as we explore incredible stories of leaders forging industries, enterprises, and ultimately, themselves. I'm your host, Adam Giery, and welcome to Capital Class. Let's begin. Classmates, welcome to a special episode of Capital Class, live from ASU+GSV 2025. Today's household education companies were once an idea, an innovation or invention with the goals of impacting the American education system. In the life cycle of these businesses often arrives a major inflection point: growth inorganically, or exiting a business to grow in a new modality, often with new leaders and investors. While the past 4 years of rapid M&A activity in the education sector feels normal, there was a time in which this industry was both under-recognized and undervalued. Yet, it was at this very time today's guests forged a new business, founding a sector-leading enterprise and a business recognized as the preeminent banking and consultancy. Our guest is both an incredible banker and firm. Today, we are joined by Chris Curran, founder and CEO of Tyton Partners. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Chris, we're at an interesting time. Both the public markets and the private markets feel uncertain. What is your view of the market landscape as it relates to education companies and what you're seeing both in volume and speed in the marketplace?
Well, you asked me during an interesting week, that's for sure. I think when you have unknown in markets, the perception of risk becomes binary risk, and there's reticence to place trades and deploy capital. And there's probably a devaluing element to that environment as well. I think we're going to see a very interesting back half of this year, and H2 is going to be a much more aggressive M&A environment than it's likely going to be for many people in Q2.
Within that, right, within the M&A specifically in the education sector, I think very often it's talked about almost simplistically, right? Grow your business, sell your business. How complicated is that process?
I mean, it's extraordinarily complicated, and it's interesting. We don't view our competition as other bulge bracket banks or other large boutiques. We view it as the large percentage of deals that go unbanked, and that is devaluing. That's a discount to true enterprise value. It's oftentimes distracting to the management of a company that doesn't deploy a sophisticated banking advisor partner to get the best outcome, best structure, best price discovery, best chemistry and alignment with the strategic or financial investor that may be at the table. And literally a very large percentage of the deals that transact go unbanked. That's really where we see our opportunity. And we've historically been the leader in working with founder-led, entrepreneurial-based businesses or family-owned businesses. If you look back longitudinally over the last 30 years, that's also where most of the trades have occurred. Companies doing between 10 and 150 million is how we define that lower mid-market, but really clustering around the 10 to 40, 10 to 50 million revenue run rate is where a high concentration of activity occurs and where we really dominate the league tables globally in ed tech.
Now, as a founder, which you are, you have a special place, I would say, for business leaders, and you really are helping them realize the value of their life's work. How important is that component to the process?
Extremely important. And I think you need to be able to take that entrepreneurial magnetism that comes from most founder leaders and that energy and drive and package that into an asset in the business outside the product, code, whatever hard tangible assets may be there that are adding value to learners in any of the segments, whether it's K-12, higher ed, or corporate L&D. And really telling that passion play is a very different part of a story in education versus other industrial end markets for certain. And we're quite good at helping to weave that narrative and help to promote that story and that impact, particularly for the learner on the other side.
You talk about unbanked deals, which is interesting. I hear of failed processes. And in some ways, it's almost startling at how people will work with great intentionality to build their business and then attempt to realize that value on their own.
Yeah.
What are the common pitfalls that you see now with 25 years in retrospect in these processes?
The most common mistake is putting out a forecast that you're going to start a process and finish it ideally in 6 months. And it's very easy to get distracted and deviate from the normal course of running a business if you're undertaking on your own shoulders or an internal management team's own shoulders all of the requirements, the cycles, the data, the translation of that data to an investor community on the other side. And so that's the biggest pitfall. You set out to do something yourself. You have a gross margin here and a revenue growth here year over year, and you end up coming in 25% below that mark, which is devaluing and sometimes is not just toxic, can be a matter of existential reality for the business getting sold at all. So that's probably the biggest pitfall we see. And I think secondly is having not gone through a process which has so many different twists and turns and layers of complexity to it. Entrepreneurs are often not really understanding the complexity of what it takes to provide a business with every element of diligence and data Q&A responsible to effectively complete diligence in a process and get the best outcome and the best partner.
And your role in that process is in some ways to help that story be told.
Correct.
Not just the financial story, but the future story.
Correct. And we are very adept at coming in to those client partner relationships with very big ears, understanding their view, understanding their business, understanding where they're going, and taking our expertise and our long history and track record of overlaying and augmenting that story of, we might want to be thinking about this as an outcome, as a future growth driver and catalyst for additional growth beyond where you're playing today, and really think through and unlock all the possibilities of value and impact for those education enterprises.
And obviously it's hard to be objective with this, but your view, the value in a banker in preserving both the real tangible assets of a business, but the helping those founders and those investors capture what they originally aspired to be the future value of that business. Like how important is that?
I think it's critical, and that authenticity and genuineness comes through in the eyes of investors on the other side. And if you don't have that, there's always a nagging itch or something left to be diligence that may just be a boogeyman and doesn't actually exist. And if it is authentic and you're able to translate that in the communications of the materials that you use to sell any business, a confidential information memorandum as our product that we develop on behalf of our clients, you're going to have more value, you're going to have a better outcome, you're going to have more interested parties in the process.
We talk a lot about the origin of a business, right? From the idea to enterprise. And I think what's so powerful about your story is that there was a time when this was not what you did every day. And you forged into a marketplace well before it has arrived at where it is today as almost like a known commodity. Take us back to the early days of Tyton Partners.
Tyton Partners was really an amalgamation of a lot of different experiences. I spent 10 years in public service, recovering attorney and public policy advocate. That's why I first got the bug that education as an end market was going to be my life story and its tapestry. And it's been a rich story ever since. And I was an early startup founder of an ed tech assets focused on the K-12 market. I was a part of the founding team of a large syndicated research group in the global education space called EduVentures. I was involved with starting private equity fund focused on education, and the blueprint for Tyton Partners, in addition to my time on Wall Street as an investment banker, was an amalgamation of all those experiences. And we saw a forward-looking and futuristic advisory firm and banking firm that would do things differently and better and really drive value based off our domain expertise, align with our mission and interest of helping the world be a better place through improving the process of educating learners at all levels, from appropriately at ASU to GSV, cradle to grave. And we're seeing that real time in our practice.
And when you started, how big were you?
We started with just the two founding partners and a couple other partners that came in lockstep with us during our first year. And we began as an investment advisory, banking, and management consulting apparatus, and had a lot of complexity and a lot of work streams happening. We concentrated that focus into a leading industrial investment bank with an advisory service, two sister assets that complement each other quite well. We built those purposely because we viewed the market as being in need of capital and counsel constantly. So a service bureau approach is necessary, not a one-time rifle shot transactional approach that traditional banks would take. Our view is we want to work with companies from day one as a starting point, as an advisory engagement or a capital markets transactional engagement, and work with those companies through their life cycle, through future M&A, through future growth, through future trials, the hardships that come and go with the mercurial markets that we operate in, whether it's funding, regulatory, statutory issues, or just general macroeconomic conditions.
I think it's easy now, your size and breadth and success. But at the time, I mean, this was early days.
Yeah.
These were not. I'm certain you must have had a conversation or two where someone said, "You're starting a business to advise education companies."
Cowboy, crazy. What are you thinking? Those were a number of the things that we saw, which only energized our interest in building what we have today. And we've been on that consistent path for growth and impact since we started 15 years ago.
And it's real. I mean, we talked to many of your former clients on the banking side, and I don't want to sound too glamorous, but I mean, you change people's lives.
That's one of the best benefits of what we do. That's one of the most rewarding aspects for certain. And I think just on the other side, learners' lives, right? And institutions and communities and societal and market objectives are what's so fascinating about the markets we operate in and so rewarding.
How do you take inventory of progress made beyond revenue?
I think I'm very proud of the fact that we built this from day one with a global design and a global footprint, and about a quarter of our revenue and activities have been from emerging markets, year in, year out throughout that development cycle. So we've been able to, without having a lot of feet in the street in international markets, serve in international markets. So I'd say it's pretty obvious during COVID, but it was pretty amazing to get hired by private equity-backed educational assets in emerging markets, never meet the teams or the investors in person, complete that whole transaction, and actually not be in a room with any of those participants until a closing dinner. The way COVID induced a different way of doing business, but also that reality was occurring in our business before COVID. I think our brand and our domain expertise and our capabilities really resonated in this community, which is a huge market, like neck and neck or second only to global healthcare. But in reality, there's a small number of market makers that are really participating in the transactional advisory side and influencing where these markets head and how they mature.
And when you dream about the future, what does Tyton look like?
I think just continue to do what we've been doing, and in the vein of that service-oriented and mission-based approach to doing well by doing good. I think I'm a competitive individual and want to push to be covering the market and serving it better than anyone else in any other competitive enterprise, and but also being a value-added partner to any constituency in the markets that we serve.
One of the hardest parts, I think, about being a founder and leader is that our businesses become our identity, almost one and the same. How do you unplug?
You know the answer to a few of those questions. I like to fish. Being out in the water. Being out in the water is a big part of my enjoyment. I think family time. I've had an incredibly lucky journey to have a very balanced approach to that. Yes, I spent a lot of time on airplanes, and I'm in service of our clientele. You got to be there when they snap their fingers, when there's a emergency to eradicate the situation to solve for. You got to be there. But I think it's a great. We're the hardest working but lifestyle oriented business entrepreneurs you'll run into, I think, in capital markets, certainly, and want to continue to maintain that culture in our firm. I think we live by the mantra of work hard, play hard, and we hire people that have the maturity and the skills and the expertise to get whatever they need to get done wherever they are, even though we're central. We have two HQs in Boston and in Manhattan. Primarily the consulting team operates out of Boston and the banking team operates out of Manhattan. But we have a lot of flexibility and really encourage a different culture than you'd see at traditional banks of grind. It's grind in service of the best outcome, but do it in a balanced way. And I think that resonates and persists in our culture.
I think what's so incredibly impressive about your work is that you make it look really easy, but yet it's really hard. Is that true?
It's extremely hard. I think you get somewhat immune to it through the calluses of repetition and having so many transactional successes under your belt. You understand the scientific approach and where that meets the artistic element that has to be resident in every process for it to be successful and to drive the ultimate value and best structure and best outcome. And with that, and with a lot of that experience and repetitions of doing that over and over again, it becomes a flywheel, and you're able to actually add more value with each event and experience you have because you've learned a little bit more about human nature, a little bit more about individuals' biases or preferences and how you prosecute through a transaction to the end. And those things build upon one another. An experience in any industry is the life's blood of that service, service provider's capabilities.
Chris, what an amazing episode. We get everyone, our guests out on our fast four. So this is just comes to mind right off the top. Emerging trend in the marketplace that interests you the most right now?
Yeah, I think we're bombarded constantly with everything relative to AI, obviously almost to the point of it being cliche, but it is happening with, to me, great bemusement and great amazement in amazing and unexpected ways. That's going to be a huge part of our lives in the future state, obviously. But I think the thing I'm most interested in is at-risk learners' skills to jobs pathways. One company that I'm invested in and on the board of, Unmuddle, is a great example of that. Being able to have high-quality, low-cost curriculum, certifications, credentials, or degrees that get you into a job with a multiple of a dignity wage, high-value opportunity to further enhance your education credentials, being that one of the most significant roadblocks to degree approachment is cost, financial ability, and there's a lot of inability to underwrite those educational protocols in the traditional degree way. So we're very interested in those types of models, and there's a lot of interesting things happening in that arena where you're seeing an amalgamation for the first time of the corporate beneficiary of that supply, labor talent, higher education or alternative credentials, non-traditional pathways to work, and the K-12 environment, all melding into a beautiful and fascinating enablement for learners and for industry and for society. And that's probably one of the things I'm most excited about as a market end.
One place in the world everyone needs to visit.
Wow. I would have to say the Adirondacks and Saranac Lake, New York, where I grew up.
Greatest,
beautiful places in the country, for sure.
The greatest area of growth for you in the coming year?
Really, talent development, and we've had a lot of great luck and great people that have stayed with our business and climbed through the ladder in a longer period of time than you would traditionally see in a bank or strategic consultancy. Continuing to build those long-term players that will be the future leadership of the company is a big part of what we're focused on now and over the next 5 years, for sure.
And favorite podcast that everyone needs to be listening to?
The Adam Giery Show.
Well, besides Capital Class.
I'm not going to go there on that one. I'm going to refrain from answering that question.
Well, Chris, our partnership, we couldn't be prouder of, and frankly, our friendship has meant a lot. So thank you so much for being a member of Capital Class and for joining today's show.
Thank you. Keep it up. You're doing great work. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining today's episode of Capital Class. If you're interested in joining our next discussion, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcast platforms. Capital Class is a venture with the Strategist Podcast Network. To view the entire lineup of shows, visit strategistgroup.com. I'm Adam Giery. Class is closed.